Hey, this is Matt from the Woodworking Nook. Today I make a headboard that's just about as big as my shop. Alright, so to break down large pieces of lumber in my shop, I add these supports that help just support a large 4x8 sheet of plywood while I'm breaking it down. This allows me to break it down on the workbench as opposed to on the floor outside. For our first cut, we're going to knock off that factory edge so that we have a nice clean and straight edge to reference off of. And I'm using the TSO guide rail connectors, the self-aligning ones. These ones are like night and day compared to the standard guide rail connectors that you can buy. They align perfectly and are super straight every single time. So we're just taking off this first edge here to make sure it's nice and clean and square for our cuts. And I'm just cutting out two main pieces. We have the back of the headboard and then the slats that will actually laminate together. So it's kind of the same piece since the slats will be the same size as the backing of the headboard. So we're going to cut down this main piece, and then the slats will actually be pretty much a duplicate as well. Just making sure that this is nice and straight and ready to cut. It's kind of difficult with a large sheet of plywood, but it works. Once the pieces are cut out, we take down the support brackets and then we will bring in those two smaller pieces to laminate together to create the slats. So the idea behind this is so that we have the standard plywood veneer on the sides of the slats. Then for the face of it, or what would be the plywood edges, we will edge band with 1.5" edge banding. So that will make all three sides with the maple veneer. So right now just laminating them and screwing it in with, I think they were just pocket screws that had a nice flat head on it. And I needed a little extra, so I just laminated an additional piece together. And once these were dry, took out the screws, and then we will cut this up here. And it's okay if they're off a little bit, like they're not exactly flush with each other, because we're just going to square them up here. So you want to make sure you do size it a little bit oversized so that you do have the ability to cut it off. And I'm just cutting off those screw holes since those are not needed. Another tip, make sure you pay attention to the edge, the grain of the wood. You want to make sure it's going up. That way it matches the edge banding. I don't know if you'd be able to see it, but I would. And if you're building the thing, it will most likely drive you nuts if you accidentally go the wrong grain direction for the sides of the slats. So that's kind of why we have that extra piece there. It's because this was supposed to go the other way. So once we have this all squared up and broken down, we're going to start taking off each slat here. So just making sure I have this marked properly with my combination square. That way I can make repeatable cuts on the waist side of each cut. So now this process, we'll just rinse and repeat, cut each slat out, making sure it's measured properly with that combination square, giving us an exact same cut every single time. So then once you kind of get close, you want to make sure you have a piece that is the same size as the current piece that you're cutting. That way you can tape it together with painter's tape to give it support for that track for each cut. Once all these pieces are cut out, we're going to do a dry fit to kind of see where they're all laying out here. And I have them spaced about a ½ inch between each slat. And we're going to mark the middle of the slat running down the whole headboard. And this is so that we can put painter's tape down while we paint the backing black. So I want a flat black paint to show on the back of the headboard. That way when you look through each slat, it just has a nice flat black look to it. And since these will be glued on, I want the glue to adhere properly. So we need to make sure paint does not get where the glue will go. So just using a T-square to mark the lines of where all the painter's tape should go. Here, just making sure each one is square, just verifying that that T-square was actually square. So now I'm going to take the edges off each of these slats just to make sure that they glue down properly, nice and flat, and for that edge banding. And the one thing I hate more than sanding is watching other people sand. So we'll get this done pretty quick here. So now we're going to add painter's tape to the headboard and add that flat black paint that will show through each of the slats. So then I just added 2 coats of this paint to the board. I just like to dump it on there and roll it all in. Once that was dry, I pulled the tape and it left kind of a cool look. I guess if you want to stop here, you could, but we're not going to today. So now what I'm going to do is finish the edges on all of the slats. That way, once we adhere them to the headboard, we don't have to get in on the sides of them. And I'm just using a hard wax oil to finish the sides and the top and the whole thing. And once that was relatively dry, I flipped them over and did the other side. And I ended up spacing them out so that they could dry a little better. And I actually ended up numbering them when I laid them out so that I could put them back in the same order, just in the off chance that some were slightly bigger than the other. I didn't want an eventual misalignment towards the edge of the headboard. So I ended up deciding to wait to put on the edge banding until after I nailed them onto the headboard. That way I didn't have to fill in any nail holes on the edge banding. So right now they are not edge banded, but just putting a small bead of glue and using my brad nailer to nail them in. You want to make sure to not hit the slats right in the middle since they're laminated, because that could split them. So you just hit each side so that they are securely fastened to the back of the headboard. And I'm just using that 1/2 inch spacer to make sure that they're all spaced out properly. And since we marked the middle of each one, you want to make sure that they're all being lined up properly so that they're not off at all. And I would occasionally check to make sure everything's square as well. You can see the numbers here and that centering mark to make sure everything is lined up properly. So just making sure everything was good. Once that was done, it was time to edge band all the faces of the slats. So I just got this 250-foot roll of 1.5 inch maple edge banding. This is the pre-glued edge banding with a hot melt adhesive where you can use an iron to attach it. So I cut out each slat with just scissors. I find that if you just have good scissors, they will it'll cut pretty easily. And then just cutting the piece for that top stretcher. So I just use a basic household iron to adhere each of the pieces of edge banding. Normally have these it's set to the cotton setting, and a lot of people I've seen use like a brown paper bag in between the iron and the edge banding. There's only been a few cases where I've gotten burning. As long as you're pretty quick and just apply the heat, it should work out pretty well. And this process will take the longest because you want to make sure that each piece of edge banding is properly secured. So you want to kind of touch each of the sides to make sure it's properly glued down. And I use a J-roller to kind of add some additional pressure. So you can see me kind of feeling the sides there to to make sure everything is properly glued down. And it took me probably about 10 to really get confident here and kind of have a good flow going. For that, you're just learning to make sure, see how it all lays down. And since we glued, since the panels are 3/4 inch plywood glued together, that's 1.5 inches, and this is 1.5 inches edge banding, you have very little room for error. So you want to make sure those are put on properly. There is probably like a 32nd of an inch on each side, but again, typically you would have a lot larger hangover for the edge banding. And also be very careful with the cords hanging around here, because that could just lift up one of the edges hanging off there and rip it right up. Once it's all trimmed flush and chamfered, you won't have to worry about it as much. So once they were all adhered, I added the edge banding to that top plate that we're going to add to the top. This is just 1.25 inches piece of wood that we'll add to the top of the headboard. Alright, so we needed to flush trim the edges on this. What I did was I ended up using a flush trim bit to knock off the majority of it. And I did 2 passes up and down, one to cut it properly, and then the other one coming back down to just knock off all those glue flakes that had been left from the first pass. So this process took a little while. And again, you want to make sure that cords and your vacuum hose does not hit the edge of those edge bands improperly, or else it could rip it up. Again, once we have it properly chamfered, we won't have to worry about it. So then the next pass that I did was with a chamfer bit, so that the edges were not sharp and nothing could grab them. The edge banding does stick very well as long as there's no edges for anything to catch on them, because that's when it gets pulled up. So as long as you have everything chamfered properly, this will last for a very long time. So once this was done, I went back through with some sandpaper to just make sure all the edges were good and no spots needed to be sanded down. And then I used the shop vac to hose up any additional flakes that were left off from doing all the chamfering. And so now I need to add that top plate to the top of the headboard, just using a very thin bead of glue and just using my brad nailer to nail it down to the top. You do not want glue to squeeze out here. Make sure it's all flush and there's no glue squeeze out. Now what we're going to do is add the edge banding to the side. We'll add it to both sides of the headboard. And we'll cut off the sides here And just make sure we have it chamfered properly so that no edges can catch anything. And we'll flip it over and do the other side using that iron, getting that thing edge banding adhered. Once that was done, I applied the hard wax oil finish, same that we did with the sides. You want to make sure you just hit the top on this. Try not to get any going down the sides, but inevitably you will get some going down the sides. So just make sure you wipe that up after this is soaked in. So just make sure you hit the sides as well as the top when wiping down this oil. And once that was done, the next day I came back through with sandpaper and just hit it with, I use 1500 grit sandpaper. I don't know if that's actually what you're supposed to use, but it's what I use, and it makes it super smooth after. And just making sure everything is good on there. Now we're going to be adding the French cleat on the back to attach it to the wall. There are plenty of videos out there showing how to make French cleats. They're pretty easy to do. I just had this one left over from a previous headboard we had. So just going to attach this to the back of the headboard. Just be sure that you have it properly marked where you need it on the wall. Make sure it's level too. Then we added a second piece down at the bottom there, just so that it's all hanging off the wall the same distance. And I decided to add some light strips to the back. That way it could just illuminate it at night. Then after that, it's pretty much done. Once we got that French cleat attached to the wall and level, it was pretty easy to just slide it onto the wall there. And I think it turned out pretty good. If you want to see more things made like this in my shop, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.